marry her. She hurts Mommy when you leave.
What? Who hurts her?
Sir, please, he's just a child.
No! I won't allow this!
How dare you?
Don't marry her, she hurts Mommy when you leave, the maid's little boy whispered, clutching the billionaire's sleeve. He froze. His perfect fiancée smiled across the room, unaware he'd heard everything. What he discovered next shattered his trust, and the decision he made before the wedding stunned everyone watching there. The billionaire thought he was finally about to marry the perfect woman. Beautiful, elegant, charming, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone believe she belonged beside a man like him. But just 3 days before the wedding, a tiny voice shattered everything. Don't marry her. He looked down and saw the maid's 4-year-old son gripping his jacket with trembling fingers. Before he could ask what was wrong, the boy leaned closer and whispered words that made his blood run cold. She hurts Mommy when you leave. For several seconds, the billionaire couldn't move. Across the mansion, his fiancée was laughing with wedding planners, smiling as though nothing in the world could threaten her perfect future. He wanted to believe the child was confused. Maybe he had misunderstood something. Maybe it was just the imagination of a frightened toddler. But then the boy pointed toward a hallway his fiancée had repeatedly warned everyone never to enter. That changed everything. Instead of confronting her, the billionaire pretended he had heard nothing. He smiled through dinner. He discussed wedding arrangements. He even kissed his fiancée goodnight. But after midnight, when the entire mansion became silent, he quietly returned to that forbidden hallway. What he discovered behind the locked door made his hands shake. Yet that wasn't the worst part. Because hidden among the maid's belongings was something bearing his own name. Suddenly, he realized this wasn't simply about a cruel woman hurting an employee. Someone had been lying to him for months. Someone inside his mansion knew the truth. And the maid herself seemed terrified to reveal it. By sunrise, the billionaire had made a decision no one expected. The wedding guests still arrived. The bride still walked down the aisle. But instead of saying, "I do," he did something that left everyone speechless. What exactly had the toddler witnessed? Why was the maid too frightened to speak? What was hidden behind that locked door? And what did the billionaire do at the altar that shocked everyone? His name was Ethan Cole. At 38, Ethan controlled Cole Meridian, a technology and logistics empire valued at more than $11 billion. Newspapers described him as disciplined, calculating, and almost impossible to surprise. That reputation had been earned. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without raising his voice. He had walked away from hostile takeovers while men twice his age shouted across conference tables. He had rebuilt parts of his father's failing company after college, transforming an outdated regional operation into an international corporation. But that night, standing barefoot on the polished floor of his own mansion, Ethan felt something he had not felt in years. Fear. Not fear for his money. Not fear for his reputation. Fear that the life he believed he understood was built on a lie. The hallway Noah Carter had pointed toward belonged to the oldest section of the mansion. Ethan had grown up there. Long before marble floors, magazine photographers, charity galas, and private jets became ordinary parts of his life, the West Wing had belonged to his mother, Elena Cole. Her study had been at the end of that hallway. Elena had died almost 2 years earlier. And since her death, Ethan had rarely entered it. Madison Reed had encouraged that. "You don't have to keep reopening old wounds," she had once told him gently. At the time, Ethan thought she was protecting him. Now he wondered what else she might have been protecting. He moved quietly down the hallway. A faint strip of light showed beneath the last door. Ethan stopped. Someone was inside. His first instinct was to call security. Then he remembered Noah's frightened face. "She hurts Mommy when you leave." Ethan reached for the handle. Locked. That was unusual. No rooms inside the mansion were supposed to be locked without his knowledge. He tried again. Nothing. Then he noticed scratches around the brass plate, as though the lock had been recently changed. His heartbeat quickened. Ethan returned to his study, opened a drawer, and retrieved the master key ring his late mother had insisted he keep. "Never surrender every key to your own house," Elena used to say. As a teenager, Ethan had laughed whenever she said it. Now, nearly 20 years later, her voice returned with chilling clarity. "Never surrender every key to your own house." The original key did not fit. That meant someone had deliberately replaced the lock. Ethan stared at it for several seconds before walking downstairs to the maintenance room. He returned with tools. 10 minutes later, the door opened. The smell hit him first. Dust, cleaning chemicals, and something metallic. He switched on his phone flashlight. The room had once been used to store furniture, but most of it had been cleared out. A folding chair sat near the center. Beside it was a broken ceramic cup. There were several cardboard boxes stacked against one wall. And on a small table rested something Ethan recognized instantly. Grace Carter's purse. The maid's purse. He stepped closer. A scarf lay beside it. There was a dark brown stain near one edge. Ethan touched it. Dry. His stomach tightened. Blood. He searched the room more carefully. One box contained cleaning supplies. Another held discarded wedding decorations. The third contained Grace's personal belongings. Her employee identification. A photograph of Noah. A small silver necklace. An old phone. And an envelope. Ethan almost overlooked it. It had been pushed underneath a folded sweater. But when he pulled it free, he stopped breathing for a moment. His name was written across the front. Ethin. The handwriting belonged to his mother. He knew every curve of it. He had seen that handwriting on birthday cards, school notes, Christmas presents, business documents, and the final letter Elena had left him before undergoing what doctors had called a routine medical procedure 3 years earlier. Ethan lowered himself slowly onto the chair. His hands began to shake. Why did Grace have a letter from his mother? Why was it hidden in this room? And why had nobody given it to him? He opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small flash drive. The letter began, "Ethan, if Grace gives this to you, something has happened that I was unable to stop. Do not trust appearances. And do not confront anyone until you have watched what is on this drive. Love always. Mom." Ethan read the words twice. Then a third time. His throat tightened. For nearly 2 years, he had carried the guilt of not being with Elena during her final hours. She had died after what doctors called a sudden cardiac event. There had been no suspicious circumstances. No investigation. Nothing except tragedy. Or so he had believed. He inserted the flash drive into his laptop. There were 6 files, 5 documents, 1 video. The video was dated 11 days before Elena's death. Ethan clicked it. His mother appeared on screen. She was sitting in her study. The same study located only 30 feet from where Ethan now sat. Elena looked tired. More frightened than Ethan had ever seen her. If you are watching this, she began, then I either lost my nerve or I ran out of time. Ethan leaned closer. Elena looked directly into the camera. There is a woman who has recently attached herself to several people connected with our family foundation. She is intelligent, patient, and extremely good at becoming whatever the person in front of her needs. Ethan's fingers froze over the keyboard. She uses different names. A photograph appeared on screen. The woman was younger. Her hair was darker. But Ethan recognized her immediately. Madison. His mother continued. I knew her as Rebecca Lane. Ethan felt the room tilt beneath him. Madison Reed had told him she grew up in Oregon. She had said her parents died when she was 21. She had claimed to work in nonprofit development before moving to New York. Elena's recording told another story. She approached our foundation through a consulting company. Within 6 months, accounting discrepancies appeared, small ones at first, then larger transfers. When I began asking questions, 2 staff members resigned unexpectedly. The video changed. Bank transfers, shell corporations, invoices, different signatures. Then another image appeared. A man standing beside Madison. His name was Grant Wallace, Ethan's director of residential security. The man who controlled every camera, alarm, staff credential, and vehicle movement on the estate. Ethan stood so suddenly, the chair nearly fell backward. Grant had worked for the Cole family for 9 years. He had stood beside Ethan at Elena's funeral. He had personally promised to protect the house afterward. Ethan remembered that day with painful clarity. Rain had fallen over the cemetery. Madison had not yet officially entered his life. Grant had stood beneath a black umbrella beside him. Your mother trusted me, Grant had said. I won't let anything happen to you. Now Elena's recorded voice continued. If Grant Wallace still works for my son when he sees this, Ethan needs to understand something. Grant is not loyal to our family. Ethan stared at the screen. A cold sensation moved through him. His mother had known. And somehow she had died before telling him. A sound came from the hallway. Ethan snapped the laptop shut. Footsteps. Slow. Approaching. He turned off his flashlight. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle moved. Ethan remained still. Then someone whispered, Mr. Cole. Grace. Ethan opened the door. She nearly screamed when she saw him. Her face drained of color. Sir, you shouldn't be here. Ethan stared at her. Grace was 31, quiet, and almost painfully reserved. She had worked at the mansion for 5 years. Elena had hired her personally after meeting her through a hospitality training program. Ethan had always considered her reliable. Invisible, almost. He suddenly hated himself for that word. Invisible. How many times had she carried coffee into his study while he barely looked up? How many times had she cleaned rooms while executives discussed millions of dollars around her? How much had happened inside his house simply because powerful people assumed the staff saw nothing and mattered less? Grace, he said quietly, what did Madison do to you? Grace's eyes filled instantly. Nothing. The answer came too quickly. Ethan glanced at her wrist. There was makeup along the skin. He reached toward it, then stopped before touching her. May I? Grace hesitated. Then she slowly wiped at the makeup herself. A purple bruise appeared beneath it. Ethan's jaw tightened. How long? Grace looked toward the hallway. You need to leave. This is my house. That's exactly why you need to leave. Ethan frowned. Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. The cameras. He remembered Grant. How many? Almost everywhere. Not this room. She shook her head. This was Mrs. Cole's old storage room. She had the wiring disconnected years ago because she didn't like cameras near her private study. Ethan glanced at the laptop. How did you get my mother's letter? Grace covered her mouth. For several seconds, she struggled to speak. She gave it to me. When? The night before she died. Ethan felt as though something had struck his chest. You saw my mother the night before she died. Grace nodded. And you never told me. I tried. Her voice broke. I tried, Mr. Cole. Ethan wanted to be angry. For one hot second, anger was easier than grief. But then he saw the terror in Grace's face. Not guilt. Terror. What happened? Grace looked toward the hallway again. Then she whispered, not here. They moved into Alina's old study. The room had remained mostly untouched since her death. A thin layer of dust covered the desk. Her books still lined the shelves. A framed photograph showed Ethan at 12, grinning beside his mother while holding a badly decorated birthday cake. He remembered that afternoon. His father had promised to come home. He never did. Ethan had waited beside the front window until 9 that night. Eventually, Alina found him there. She sat beside him without criticizing his father, without offering excuses. She simply said, when somebody repeatedly shows you what they value, believe the pattern, not the promise. Ethan had carried that lesson into business. Yet somehow he had forgotten it in love. Grace sat across from him. Noah saw her hit me last week, she said. Madison. Grace nodded. Why? Because I told her I wouldn't keep helping. Helping with what? Grace looked ashamed. Moving things. What things? Documents, jewelry, files from your mother's study, sometimes packages. Ethan's expression hardened. You were stealing for her. No. Grace shook her head quickly. At first she told me you had authorized it. She said you wanted your mother's things quietly removed because seeing them upset you. Ethan remembered Madison suggesting that Alina's rooms be gradually cleared. He had refused, or thought he had. Grace continued. Then I saw papers with your signature. What papers? Trust documents, property transfers, insurance records. Ethan felt another chill. I asked why she needed them. She told me to mind my own business. And when you did, she reminded me about my record. Ethan frowned. What record? Grace lowered her eyes. 8 years earlier, before Noah was born, Grace had been arrested for depositing fraudulent checks at a hotel where she worked. She had insisted she didn't know the checks were fraudulent. The charges were eventually reduced, but the arrest remained. Alina knew about it when she hired Grace. She believed me, Grace whispered. Your mother said one mistake or even one accusation shouldn't decide someone's entire life. Ethan looked at his mother's empty chair. That sounded exactly like Alina. Madison found the old records, Grace continued. She said one phone call could make it look like I was stealing from you. Why would you believe she could do that? Grace gave him a sad look. Because she showed me the jewelry. What jewelry? Your mother's diamond bracelet. Ethan stood. The bracelet had disappeared 3 months after Alina's death. He remembered filing an insurance report. Nothing had ever been found. She put it in my bag, Grace said, then showed me security footage of me leaving the room carrying that same bag. Ethan understood. With Grant controlling the cameras, they could create whatever narrative they wanted. She said if I went to you, the police would see a poor maid with a criminal record stealing from a billionaire. Grace's eyes filled, and she said Noah would go into foster care while I sat in jail. Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time, Noah's words made complete sense. She hurts Mommy when you leave. How often did she hurt you? Grace did not answer. That was answer enough. Ethan's voice hardened. You should have told me. I wanted to. You should have come directly to me. I did. Ethan stared at her. When? 4 months ago. He said nothing. You were in Chicago, Grace continued. I called your private office line. Grant answered. He said he would arrange a meeting. Ethan's stomach sank. He never told me. I know. I tried again after you returned. Madison came to my room that night. Grace looked down. She knew exactly what I had said on the phone. Grant had been listening. Ethan thought back over the past year. Business trips, late flights, unexpected meetings. Every time he left the mansion, Madison knew exactly when he would return. Not because he told her. Because Grant controlled the transportation schedule. A terrible possibility formed. How did my mother die, Grace? The maid went completely still. I don't know. That wasn't what I asked. Grace looked toward Elena's photograph. The night before she died, Mrs. Cole called me into this room. Grace's voice became distant as memory carried her backward. Elena had been standing beside the fireplace. She wore a blue robe. Her hands shook. On the desk sat the envelope marked ETHAN. She told me people were stealing from the foundation, Grace said. She said she had proof. She said she was going to speak to you in the morning. Why didn't she? Grace swallowed. Because Madison came here. Ethan's breath caught. Madison told me she met my family after my mother died. Grace shook her head. She was here that night. The room seemed suddenly smaller. What happened? I heard them arguing. About what? Money, accounts, somebody named Grant. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Then, I went upstairs because Mrs. Cole told me to leave. About an hour later, I saw Madison walking out through the service entrance. Did my mother seem ill? No. Was she alone? Grace hesitated. No. Who was with her? Grant. Silence. Ethan stared at the woman across from him. Every instinct he had developed through decades of negotiation told him Grace believed what she was saying. That did not prove it, but it was enough to make one thing certain. The wedding could no longer happen. At least not the wedding Madison expected. Ethan looked at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Where is Noah? In my room. Take him somewhere safe. Grace shook her head immediately. If I leave tonight, they'll know. Ethan realized she was right. Grant could be watching every exit. Ethan thought carefully. No change in routine, he said. Tomorrow morning you behave normally, I behave normally. Grace stared at him. You're still going through with the wedding. No. A strange calm entered Ethan's face. But Madison is going to believe I am. The following morning, Madison found Ethan drinking coffee beside the garden. She wore a silk robe and carried a tablet filled with wedding schedules. There you are. She kissed his cheek. Ethan smiled. Doing so required more control, than closing any business deal in his life. Couldn't sleep. A little restless. Nerves. Maybe. Madison laughed. You nervous? She sat opposite him. For years, Ethan had believed he was excellent at reading people. Now he studied her as though seeing her for the first time. Madison's beauty had never been dramatic. It was precise, measured. She knew when to smile, when to lower her voice, when to touch someone's arm, when to appear vulnerable. They had supposedly met 18 months earlier at a museum fundraiser. Ethan remembered the evening clearly. He had attended only because a board member insisted. Madison spilled sparkling water near his table. She laughed. He helped her. They talked for 20 minutes. Later, she confessed she had no idea who he was. Ethan had loved that. For once, he thought someone had seen the man before the money. Now he remembered his mother's recording. She is extremely good at becoming whatever the person in front of her needs. Their meeting had not been chance. It had been research, preparation, a performance. Ethan. Madison's voice pulled him back. You're staring. Just thinking how lucky I am. Her expression softened. For half a second, he almost doubted everything. That was the frightening part. Madison was good. Very good. She reached across the table. 2 more days. Ethan squeezed her hand. 2 more days. Behind her, through the glass doors, he saw Grant Wallace watching them. Grant smiled. Ethan smiled back. By noon, Ethan had quietly contacted Daniel Harper, a retired federal investigator who now handled corporate security for Cole Meridian. Not residential security. Corporate. That distinction mattered. Grant had never controlled Daniel. Ethan arranged the meeting through a prepaid phone purchased by his driver during an errand. They met inside an underground parking garage beneath one of Ethan's office towers. Daniel listened without interruption. When Ethan finished, he said, "You understand we need evidence before making accusations. I have my mother's files. Bring copies, not originals." Why? Because if these people have been doing this for years, the second they realize you know, evidence starts disappearing. Ethan handed him the flash drive. Daniel inserted it into an isolated laptop. After reviewing several files, his expression changed. These transfers are sophisticated. Can you trace them? Probably. How long? Daniel looked at him. Longer than you have before the wedding. Ethan leaned back. Then we use the wedding. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Ethan explained. For the first time that morning, Daniel smiled. That, he said, might actually work. The plan depended on Madison believing she had won. So Ethan gave her exactly what she expected. That afternoon, he approved the wedding flower budget without questioning it. He signed a revised honeymoon itinerary. He told the staff to open a 1982 Bordeaux for the rehearsal dinner. And when Madison casually asked him whether he had finally considered updating certain trust documents after the wedding, Ethan pretended not to notice the significance. My lawyers can handle it next month. Madison smiled. Of course. But her eyes changed. Only slightly. Ethan noticed. That evening, Daniel called. We found Rebecca Lane. Ethan tightened his grip on the phone. Who is she? Madison Reed. I know that. No, I mean Rebecca Lane is one of at least 4 identities connected to the same woman. Ethan said nothing. Different states, different companies, different wealthy men. How many? 3 that we can verify. What happened to them? 1 bankruptcy, 1 contested estate, 1 dead. Ethan's face went cold. Dead how? Heart attack. The same words used on Alina's death certificate. Daniel continued. Ethan, there's more. What? Grant Wallace's sister received a payment of $400,000 2 weeks after your mother died. From whom? A shell company connected to Rebecca Lane. Ethan looked across the dark grounds of the mansion. In the distance, wedding lights were being installed beneath the oak trees. Hundreds of tiny bulbs. Beautiful. Perfect. Like stars arranged to hide the darkness between them. Get law enforcement involved, Ethan said. Already have. Can they arrest them? Not yet. Why? We need a stronger link. Ethan thought of Grace's bruised wrist. What about assault? If Grace gives a statement. She's terrified. Then don't push her, we protect her first. Ethan respected that answer. That night something happened they had not planned. Noah disappeared. Grace came running into Ethan's study shortly after 11. Her face was white. He's gone. Ethan stood. What? I put him to bed 20 minutes ago. I went downstairs to finish the dining room when I came back. She could barely breathe. The window was open. Ethan grabbed his phone. Then stopped. Grant controlled estate security. Calling him would reveal panic. Stay here. No, I'm coming. Grace. That's my son. Something in her voice ended the argument. They searched the east garden first. Nothing. Then the greenhouse. Empty. Grace called Noah's name softly, terrified of attracting the wrong attention. At last, they heard crying. Faint. Near Alina's old greenhouse shed. Grace ran. Noah sat behind a stack of planting pots, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. Baby, why did you leave your room? Noah sobbed against her shoulder. The pretty lady told me Mr. Bunny was outside. Ethan froze. What pretty lady? Noah pointed toward the mansion. Her. Madison. Grace closed her eyes. Ethan crouched in front of Noah. Did Madison bring you outside? The boy nodded. Then she went away. Did she say anything? Noah sniffled. She said bad boys who tell secrets get lost. Grace began trembling. Ethan felt something inside him change. Until that moment, part of him had been operating like a businessman. Gather evidence. Control risk. Outmaneuver opponents. Now the threat had been directed at a 4-year-old child. This was no longer strategy. It was protection. Ethan stood. We move them tonight. Daniel's team entered the estate through a service road Grant believed had been decommissioned. Grace and Noah were transporting to a secure apartment belonging to Cole Meridian. To explain their disappearance, Ethan instructed staff that Noah had developed a fever and Grace had taken him to urgent care. Madison reacted exactly as Ethan expected. Oh, the poor thing. She sounded concerned. Then she asked, will Grace be back before the wedding? That question told Ethan everything. Not is Noah okay? Will Grace be back? I gave her the weekend off, Ethan replied. For one fraction of a second, Madison's smile disappeared. Then it returned. That was kind of you. The rehearsal dinner took place the next evening. Nearly 60 guests filled the mansion. Investors, celebrities, family friends, politicians, people who thought money protected them from ugly truths. Grant moved through the gathering wearing an earpiece. Ethan watched him from across the room. 9 years. 9 years of birthdays, Christmas dinners, overseas trips, board meetings, and family funerals. How many betrayals could hide inside familiarity? Grant caught Ethan looking. Everything okay, sir? Perfect. Big day tomorrow. Ethan lifted his glass. Big day. Grant smiled. But as he turned away, Ethan noticed something. Grant's left hand was trembling. Maybe Grant knew. Or maybe guilt had finally developed a pulse. Near midnight, Ethan entered his mother's study one final time. He sat in Alina's chair. For years after his father left, Alina had been both parent and protector. She had taught Ethan to ride a bicycle in this driveway. She had attended every school debate. When he failed his first college economics exam, she mailed him a note containing 4 words. Failure is information, continue. When Ethan launched his first independent company and almost lost everything, Alina offered him money. He refused. She looked proud. You don't need rescuing, she said. Good, but never confuse independence with refusing help when truth demands witnesses. At 26, Ethan had not understood. Now he did. Truth needed witnesses. That was why the wedding would continue. Not because Ethan wanted revenge. Because Madison had survived for years by controlling private conversations. Threats happened behind doors. Documents disappeared. Victims became isolated. Stories could be denied. Tomorrow there would be 400 witnesses. And cameras Madison herself had invited. The wedding morning arrived beneath a flawless blue sky. By 10 o'clock, the estate looked like something from a magazine. White roses covered the garden arch. A string quartet rehearsed near the fountain. Caterers moved through temporary kitchens. Luxury cars lined the private road. Madison's wedding dress had been delivered from Paris. She had chosen ivory silk with hand-sewn crystals. According to one fashion journalist, it had taken 1,100 hours to make. Ethan wondered how many hours it took to manufacture a false identity. At 11:30, Daniel called. We have enough. Ethan closed his eyes. What did you find? Your mother's toxicology sample was preserved. Ethan stopped breathing. Preserved. Hospital protocol. We got an emergency authorization after presenting the financial evidence. And there was a cardiac medication in her bloodstream that wasn't prescribed to her. Ethan sat down. The room became silent around him. Could it have killed her? In the concentration found, yes. Ethan stared at the photograph of his mother on the desk. For 2 years, he had mourned an illness. Now grief transformed into something sharper. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Can you connect it to Madison? We found a pharmacy purchase under one of her aliases 3 weeks before Alina died. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. And Grant. Security logs show his access card entered your mother's wing the night she died. Those records were deleted from the active system, but backups survived on an off-site server. Ethan whispered, so they killed her. We can't state that conclusively until investigators finish, but police have enough to act. When? Daniel paused. When you give the signal. At 4:30, the guests took their seats. Grace watched from a secure room miles away through a live video feed. Noah sat beside her eating crackers, unaware that his frightened whisper had started everything. Madison appeared at the top of the garden aisle at exactly 5. Guests stood. The music began. She looked radiant. Even Ethan could admit that. Perhaps evil would be easier to recognize if it looked monstrous. But sometimes it wore silk. Sometimes it smiled. Sometimes it told you exactly what you had waited your entire life to hear. Madison walked toward him slowly. Ethan remembered their first date. She had asked about his mother. He had been surprised by how carefully she listened. Now he understood why. She had not been learning about his grief. She had been measuring it. Madison reached the altar. She took Ethan's hands. "You look nervous," she whispered playfully. "So do you." "I'm not. I know." The officiant began. Words about trust, devotion, honesty. Each one sounded almost cruel. Madison stared into Ethan's eyes. Behind her, Grant stood near the rear entrance. Daniel waited among the guests, dressed like any other attendee. 2 plainclothes detectives sat several rows apart. Maury officers waited beyond the estate gates. The officiant eventually reached the vows. "Madison, do you take Ethan?" "I do." Soft laughter moved through the crowd because she answered too quickly. Madison smiled. Then came Ethan's turn. "Ethan, do you take Madison to be your lawful wife?" "No." The garden went silent. Madison blinked. The officiant stopped. Some guests laughed nervously, assuming Ethan had made a joke. Madison squeezed his hands. "What are you doing?" Ethan gently released them. "I said no." Her smile remained, but only because hundreds of people were watching. "Ethan!" He turned toward the large screen positioned beside the reception tent. Madison followed his gaze. For the first time that day, fear entered her eyes. Ethan nodded to Daniel. The screen turned black. Then Elena Cole appeared. Gasps rippled through the garden. Ethan's mother looked directly into the camera. "If you are watching this, then I either lost my nerve or I ran out of time." Madison stepped backward. Grant reached toward his earpiece. 2 officers immediately moved closer to him. The video continued. There is a woman who uses different names. Rebecca Lane's photograph appeared. Then Madison read. Guests began whispering. Madison's face lost all color. "This is insane," she said. Ethan did not look at her. Financial records appeared next. Transfers, aliases, shell companies, photographs, Grant's name. The crowd erupted. Grant turned. He made it 3 steps before Daniel blocked him. "Don't." Grant stopped. Madison faced Ethan. "Your mother was confused." Ethan finally looked at her. Was she confused about the medication? Madison's expression changed. Tiny, almost invisible. But it was enough. "What medication?" Ethan watched her carefully. "I didn't say what kind." Silence. Madison realized her mistake. Detectives approached. One spoke quietly. "Madison Reed, also known as Rebecca Lane, we need you to come with us." Madison backed away. "No." She looked around at the guests. At the cameras. At Ethan. Her perfect audience had become witnesses. "You planned this." Ethan said nothing. "You humiliated me." "No." His voice remained calm. "You did that yourself." Madison's eyes hardened. Then she said something Ethan never forgot. "You think that Maid saved you?" Several guests gasped. Madison laughed bitterly. "She would still be polishing your floors if that stupid child had kept his mouth shut." Ethan felt his entire body go cold. The detective beside her immediately said, "Anything you say may be used." But Madison was no longer listening. Years of control were collapsing, and for the first time, the mask cracked completely. "She knew," Madison shouted. "Grace knew what happened to Alina. She kept the letter. She lied to you too." Ethan stared at her. She was afraid. She was weak. "No," Ethan said. His voice carried through the garden. "She was surviving." That silenced Madison. For a second, Ethan thought of every time he had dismissed silence as agreement. Every employee who smiled because they needed a paycheck. Every frightened person told to speak up without being given a safe place to speak. Every powerful person who believed absence of accusation meant absence of harm. Grace had tried. The system around Ethan had failed her. And Ethan had failed to notice. Grant suddenly lunged toward the side aisle. He never made it. Daniel tackled him before he reached the gate. Guests screamed. Chairs overturned. Police rushed forward. Within seconds, Grant was handcuffed. Madison stood motionless as another detective placed her under arrest. Her veil slipped from her hair. It landed on the grass. For one strange moment, that delicate white fabric moved in the wind while police escorted her away. No one spoke. Ethan looked at the altar. White roses. Champagne waiting nearby. Hundreds of thousands of dollars spent celebrating a future that had never existed. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Grace. "Is it over?" Ethan looked toward the police vehicles. "Not yet," he typed. "But you're safe." The investigation lasted 7 months. What authorities uncovered extended far beyond the Cole family. Madison Reed had been born Madison Parker in Arizona. Rebecca Lane was one alias. Jennifer Blake was another. For nearly 12 years, she had moved between wealthy social circles, charitable organizations, and private foundations. Sometimes she worked alone. Sometimes Grant helped her. Their method depended less on sophisticated technology than on ordinary human weakness. Loneliness, pride, secrecy. People saw what they wanted to see. Madison understood that better than almost anyone. Alina Cole had been the first person in Ethan's circle who seriously investigated her. That had made Alina dangerous. Prosecutors eventually alleged that Madison manipulated Alina's medication with Grant's assistance, intending to create a death that would appear natural. The preserved toxicology sample changed everything. So did the video. So did the financial trail. Grant accepted a plea agreement and testified against Madison. He admitted helping alter security footage, plant stolen property among Grace's possessions, intercept phone calls, and falsify estate access records. When prosecutors asked why he betrayed a family that had trusted him for almost a decade, Grant gave an answer far less dramatic than Ethan expected. Money. It had started with debt. Then one payment. Then another. Eventually, Grant said, turning back became harder than continuing. Ethan thought about that for a long time. People imagined betrayal happened all at once. Often it happened one compromise at a time. One lie justified by another. One line crossed until there were no lines left. Madison was convicted on multiple counts involving fraud, conspiracy, assault, obstruction, and charges connected to Alina's death. The newspapers called the case the Billionaire Bride Scandal. Ethan hated that name. To the public, it was sensational. To him, it was his mother. To Grace, it was years of fear. To Noah, it was simply the reason his mother sometimes cried when she thought he was asleep. 3 weeks after the arrests, Ethan visited Grace at the apartment where she and Noah were staying. Grace opened the door cautiously. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." Noah appeared behind her. He stared at Ethan suspiciously. Then he asked the question only a 4-year-old would ask a billionaire whose wedding had become international news. "Did you marry the main lady?" Ethan smiled. "No." Noah considered this. "Good." Grace covered her face, embarrassed. Ethan laughed for the first time in weeks. Then Noah held up a toy dinosaur. "Want to see thunder?" "Absolutely." For 20 minutes, Ethan sat on the floor while Noah explained an elaborate story involving dinosaurs, helicopters, pancakes, and a volcano. Grace watched quietly from the kitchen. When Noah eventually ran into his bedroom, Ethan stood. Grace handed him coffee. "I owe you an apology," he said. Her expression changed. "You don't." "I do." "You didn't know." "I should have." "How?" Ethan looked down at the cup. "That's what I keep asking myself." Grace sat opposite him. "Mr. Cole." "Ethan." She hesitated. "Ethan, people like Madison make sure the person being hurt looks unreliable." He looked at her. "She didn't just threaten me, she studied what I was most afraid of, losing Noah, being arrested, not being believed." Grace paused. "She studied you too." That struck him. Madison had found Ethan's weakness just as carefully. His father had abandoned the family when Ethan was 13. His mother had spent years teaching him that love did not have to disappear simply because success demanded sacrifice. But after Alina died, Ethan became isolated. Madison appeared at exactly the right moment. Patient, understanding, always available, never demanding, until he trusted her. Then the demands began so gradually he barely noticed. Change this lawyer. Replace that employee. Let Grant handle security. Stop visiting your mother's study. Don't worry about those old foundation accounts. Small steps. Tiny concessions. A locked door rarely appeared locked when you watched someone close it 1 inch at a time. Grace reached into a drawer. "There's something else." Ethan tensed. She handed him a second envelope. His mother's handwriting. Ethan stared. "Where did you get this?" "She gave me 2. "Why didn't you show me before?" "She told me the second one was only for after you knew the truth." Ethan opened it. Inside was a letter. "My dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then you finally know that I was frightened. That may surprise you. You spent your childhood believing I was fearless. I was. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is deciding that someone or something matters more than the fear does. If Grace protected this letter, then she has already shown more courage than many people with far greater power. Do not reward her merely with money. Listen to her. And if there is a child beside her, listen to him too. Children notice the truths adults train themselves to ignore." Ethan stopped reading. His vision blurred. He continued, "You have spent your life building systems, companies, teams, security, processes. Remember that no system is strong if the quietest person inside it is afraid to speak. If you learn anything from me, let it be that. Love. Mom. Ethan folded the letter carefully. Grace looked away to give him privacy. For several minutes, neither spoke. Eventually, Ethan asked, "What do you want?" Grace looked confused. Financially, professionally, anything. A faint smile touched her face. Your mother said you'd do this. What? Try to solve everything with an offer. Despite himself, Ethan laughed. That sounds like her. Grace looked toward Noah's room. I don't want charity. Then don't call it charity. I want to go back to school. For what? Social work. Ethan nodded. Done. Grace immediately frowned. I said I don't want charity. And I said done. Ethan. He lifted one hand. My mother left instructions. She did not instruct you to pay my tuition. No, but I'm very skilled at interpreting shareholder intent. Grace stared. Then she laughed. It was the first time Ethan had ever heard her laugh. Eventually, they reached an agreement. Cole Meridian established a scholarship fund for domestic workers and service employees pursuing further education. Grace became the first recipient, though she insisted on completing an application like everyone else. More importantly, Ethan transformed the reporting systems across his companies. Anonymous channels became independently managed. Household employees received direct access to outside HR representatives. Residential security was split between multiple teams, so no single person controlled information. And every employee, from executives to cleaners, received the same written promise. No complaint would be dismissed because of job title, income, education, immigration status, or personal history. Some board members considered Ethan's changes excessive. He disagreed. He had learned what silence cost. Nearly a year after the wedding that never happened, Ethan returned to the West Wing. The hallway had been restored. Elena's study remained. But the locked storage room was changed completely. Ethan turned it into a small reading room. One afternoon, Grace visited with Noah. Noah was 5 now. He ran ahead of her and stopped near the doorway. This was the bad room, he said. Ethan looked at him. It was. Noah frowned. It doesn't look bad. Ethan smiled. Rooms aren't bad. People are. Sometimes people make bad choices. Noah thought carefully. Madison made lots. Yes. Is she coming back? No. You promise. Ethan crouched until they were eye level. I promise you're safe here. Noah stared at him for several seconds. Then he nodded. For Ethan, that tiny nod meant more than signatures on 1,000 contracts. Grace entered behind them. She looked around. You changed it. I thought it needed a different memory. On one shelf stood Elena's photograph. Beside it was a framed copy of one sentence from her final letter. Listen to the quietest person in the room. Grace read it. Then she looked at Ethan. She'd like this. I hope so. Outside, Noah discovered a butterfly and immediately ran into the garden. Grace followed. Ethan remained in the doorway for a moment. The house felt different now. For years, he had believed safety meant walls, gates, cameras, guards, passwords, and wealth. But all those things had existed when Grace was being hurt. All those things had existed when Noah was frightened. All those things had existed while Grant quietly betrayed him. Security without trust was only architecture. And power without attention could become blindness. Ethan walked toward the garden. Noah was kneeling beside a row of flowers. Grace warned him not to crush them. "I'm not," he shouted. Then he looked up at Ethan. "Mr. Ethan." "Yes." "Come see." Ethan walked over. The butterfly had landed on Noah's hand. Nobody moved. For several seconds, even Noah remained perfectly still. Then the butterfly opened its wings and flew upward. Noah laughed. Ethan looked toward the old West Wing windows. He imagined his mother standing there years earlier, watching, warning, waiting for him to understand. Perhaps the most important truth had never been hidden behind a locked door. Perhaps it had been standing in front of him all along. In Grace's silence, in Grant's unusual control, in Madison's convenient perfection. In all those little moments Ethan had dismissed because the larger picture looked beautiful. And finally, in the frightened whisper of a 4-year-old boy who had no money, no influence, no evidence, and no understanding of the dangerous secret he was revealing. He simply knew his mother was being hurt, and he believed somebody should help her. That whisper stopped a wedding. It exposed years of fraud. It uncovered the truth surrounding Alina's death. And it reminded one of the most powerful men in America that sometimes the person with the least power in the room is the one telling the most important truth. Dear viewers, when someone vulnerable speaks about being hurt, especially a child, never dismiss their words simply because they cannot explain everything perfectly. Fear can silence adults, power can hide cruelty, and appearances can deceive even the smartest people. Do you think Ethan was right to expose Madison publicly at the altar? Would you have believed Noah's warning immediately, or would you have demanded proof first? And most importantly, if you discovered someone close to you was frightening another person into silence, would you confront them at once, or quietly gather the truth before making your move?